Today I want to talk about how we use flat and graded washes to create a round shape. As you might remember, one of the previous exercises I had you do was to do a series of flat washes like this to create a landscape, and we were building up to see how we could make light and dark with the flat washes. Now, graded washes, get that out of my way. Flat washes can be used to make something like this box where we do a series of washes on here, slowly getting darker and darker, and we create hard edges by having sharp changes between those flat washes. You can do a graded wash across a round object. So, it starts with the yellow on there, and then I put a dark on top of it, and it's darkest right in here. You allow it to sort of bleed through that damp wash to create a graded wash. You can also do a graded wash in a much more controlled manner. And this exercise that we're going to do with the apples will explore that. It's several steps to build this up. This is the image that we're going to work with. So we're wanting to make the apples really show that they're round, that they've got a light area and a dark area to them, that they've got a hard edge where the edge of the apple is, but they've got a soft graded edge as you go around the round. And this one place in here where the hole in the top of the apple is, it's like a little canyon there. And so the very edge of that is a sharp edge where everything else on the apple is a grade. And so then we're going to work through that. This is what a finished painting could look like. And this has been done in several layers. I've also done a bit of a background on it. You can see where I've got the hard edge right here, but then it's graded as we come down in these other areas. We've done layers to bring some of the colors in. And so here's a second version of it. Not as much background done, not quite finished in some of the areas. So just wanted to sort of let you see where the final way was going to be. Our first step on this is going to be to start with the lightest color that sort of permeates through the whole thing. And I'm seeing yellow as that color. And so I've done a graded wash on this with the yellow, and leaving where my highlights were going to be so that I know where they were, showing where it's going to be a little bit darker. So this was the first step. I'm going to show you how to do that first step, and then we'll come back and we'll do the second step on this piece. So step number one is to get the drawing on the page. And I see that I still have a few little bits and pieces floating around here. I ended up having to do a little bit of erasure on this one. I made it. Now, what yellow do we use? We could go two directions with this yellow. I'm seeing that it's leaning toward this orange side. So I am feeling I want to use my favorite slightly warm yellow, which is the New Gamboge. You could also use like the Aurelian yellow, which is a little bit more of a cool yellow. I can show you on a sample what those two look like. So I have a little space down here at the bottom of my page, which I'm hoping, I'm going to push this up just a little to make sure that it's in the image. So my New Gamboge, and I need to add a little bit more water to that to thin it down. My New Gamboge is about that color, and the Aurelian yellow leans a little more toward the green side, a little brighter yellow. That's my Aurelian yellow. We could do either one. We've got it going toward greens. It doesn't matter entirely. But let me clean my pan so that we can get some yellow mixed up here. I'm going to just go ahead and do the Aurelian yellow. Which did I do before? That's interesting. I might have done I think I did Aurelian yellow on that, not New Gamboge. Okay, so let's clean my pan here. And let me get two spots because I will need it later. Because we are it stays water soluble forever. You can reuse the paint that's in your palette. It's not like acrylics or oil where it becomes solid and waterproof when it dries. Okay, so now we've got a couple of spots here. And let's have a look at this. I said Aurelian yellow. Okay, Aurelian yellow. And I need to clean my Aurelian yellow out just a little bit. I was using it to mix some greens with, and it's still a little bit dirty in the so these paints have been sitting here drying, and they have a dry surface on them. So I can do this type of a wash on it. If you were to be using paint fresh out of the tube, it's going to be all soft, and you couldn't do this kind of a wash on it, but you also can sully it with other colors very easily. So now I want to take some of this dry paint and mix it up into a solution that is about the consistency of cream, whole milk, light cream, so that my paint is thick enough to actually make some slightly darker colors, but not so thick that it doesn't move easily on the page. So the paint straight out of the tube is really too thick to work with, and it has to be thinned down some. So if you're working straight out of the tube, be aware that you need to thin it some so you can get it to about the consistency of light cream whole milk. Now, as far as where my light and dark patterns are, I want to maintain that when I go to put this first layer on so that I remember those things. So it's light along this edge, it's light around the top, it's light around this edge here, but it's dark where that comes in next to it. So I can leave the light areas white. You can always turn white into a so I'm just doing what you might call a sissy wash, a little underwash to give myself a roadmap of where this darker painting is going to go once I get to it. Probably shouldn't do that at all. I can deal with that later. Now I'm going to be leaving this light all the way across the top of there. I'm going to leave this light across through here, and then it's going to be mid-tone. There's a beautiful light running all the way down the edge of that apple. So let's start here. And then as it gets down in here, we can paint right out to the line. And I'm just, as you can see, I'm just sort of, I've loaded my brush with a fair amount of paint, and I'm just using the brush to go along and find the edge of where I'm painting. It's almost like drawing with your brush. And if you've got the brush fairly well loaded, now my brush is not loaded so much, and notice how I'm getting dry marks here instead of that nice wet mark. So let me reload my brush. I just put a little bit more water on it so that my paint's going to be a little bit thinner with that water. Kat thought she would like to taste my paints, and I don't want her to do that because they're not good to eat. This is more light than what the final apple will have there. And so once again, we're doing a little bit of a grade on the edge of this by coming in with a damp brush. I rinsed it, dried it with my rag. I'm going to rinse it again. And when I rinse it, I really shake it around in the water. Now, let's see, we need to soften this edge, and I need to do it now before this dries any further. If it dries too much, we could come back in after it's totally dry and soften it by dampening that edge and rubbing on it a little bit. Now, this is a hard line here, but we've got some dark inside this apple here. That comes in through there, And then we're going to soften this just a little bit on this edge. You could do these apples one at a time and let them dry in between, or like how I did, I started at the back and I've slowly worked my way, but left a dry space between each apple so they don't bleed into each other. And I've only done the grades at the edge of my wash. I didn't try and do a graded wash throughout the whole piece. And so we are going to go ahead and break at this point. And then I'll show you the next step on this so that we've got the 2 steps in this video. For my next step on this, I'm going to do the apples one at a time. I'm seeing that there's a little bit of a pale green on the top of this apple, and then it goes down into a little bit more of an orangey color. And then there are orange-red marks on here, but we're going to do those in the final layer, along with, if we want to put these little slightly brownish marks on here, those will go in the final layer too. So I'm thinking of this in like little layers of tissue, and I'm looking at these colors going, let's see now, what makes up those under layers before we get that final little layer of tissue on top of it. It's sort of like tearing it apart in your mind. Now I'm also have a dark area here and a light area over here that we'll have to deal with on this intermediate apple. So let's go ahead and I will mix up some colors. Now I have some green here, but it's a dull down green, and I want a very light, pretty, brightish green. So let's just rinse out this pile of paint and get myself a clean spot to work with here. I have a, well, you may not have this in your mixture, so let's just work with what you probably do have. This is sap green, which is one of the greens that I suggested that you get. It's in watercolor. It's a nice, slightly warm green. I can make this even a little bit more yellow by adding some of my Aurelian to it. But we're going to be building up layers. I'm going to start with the middle apple to begin with, but I'm also going to do a 3-color graded wash to make this happen, because we've got a little bit of green up at the top, it goes into a yellow, it goes down into an orange, and so I'm going to show you how to do a 3-color graded wash. Always sort of fun to do these things, I think it's fun. We're also having to think about light and dark as we do it, so it's going to be interesting. Let's see, I was going to add a little bit of Aurelian to this green just to make it a little bit more of a yellow green so that it's about the right color, right, so I don't have to mix it up there on the pan. Yeah, that's feeling a little bit better. Now to make an orange, I'm going to go into my New Gamboge yellow, which is a little more of an orangey yellow, and then add to that my quinacridone rose. I like using the quinacridone rose because it's a very transparent color and it still makes nice oranges. Now this is closer to the orange we need at the very end, so I'm going to need to add more yellow to this. Those streaks that go on top are going to be about that color of orange. The underneath orange is a much paler, more yellow orange. So let's just add a bit more yellow to it. That's feeling a little closer to what I want. Maybe even a little more yellow. And then we have the Aurelian yellow that I had mixed up, and I'm going to make just a little bit more of it so that I've got that for the mixture as well. So let's just dampen this. Yeah, I need to add a little bit more water into that pan of paint so I can pull more out of there. All right. So now as we do this graded wash, yellow is a color that's going to work for both sides of that wash. So I'm going to start by putting in some yellow into here, and then we're going to work it toward both of the other colors. So I've got yellow on my brush right now, and this stem is going to go dark. I'm going to paint it right on top of what's there, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. I can paint right over it. So I'm going to put this yellow into here, and remember it goes lighter there, so I've got to be careful about not putting too much onto it over on that light area. And then I can bring some more of it down into here. Now at this point this is dry in the back, so a little bit of this can come right to that edge. Then it's going to go more orange as it comes down into here. So I'm going to add orange and then just bring it up onto this yellow, but not the whole way. You know, it's dark over in there. Let's bring it up even a little higher up in there. And then I have too much orange on my brush. So now that I've got less orange on my brush, I can bring it over into here where it's going to be a little bit lighter. Yeah. So I'm basically thinning it down at this point, and it's thinning by coming into that yellow. And okay, I'm going to take this even up into here further. And then I'm going to rinse my brush just a little bit because I want this side to come even a little bit lighter. So I rinsed my brush and I'm coming in with just a damp brush and picking up some of that paint that I just put down and spreading it around. And this looks like it's got too much paint right here. There's a little puddle and it needs to come down. There we go. And then remember we did that lift before? This felt a little too dark over on this side, so I'm coming in with my damp brush and just picking some paint up with that damp brush. And it's bleeding back into there some, so maybe I can pick up one more. I rinsed the brush, dried it halfway, 3/4 of the way, and I'm just picking a little bit more off of that side. Now, for our green, I want to do this before it dries too much. And that comes up to just a little short of I've got that highlight. There's a highlight on that edge that I don't want to get into. And now this has green as it comes all the way around through there. So I'm not working these together, I'm just letting them touch each other, and I'm bringing a few little streaks in so that they can sort of touch. And over in here it's a little bit more yellow, so let's just bring a little more yellow back into this. And then I'm feeling like it's going back to yellow as it comes up into this lighter area. And a little yellow, so it's just touching into that. And we'll just put a little bit of green in there, a little bit of green in here. And now I want this to soften here because we have that highlight in this area. And I'm also feeling like we could use just a touch. I'm just doing the tip of my brush, and you could go to a smaller brush if you felt like you didn't have enough control on this, but I'm just doing some little lines that are going to mimic those lines that I'm seeing in the apple. And a little bit of orange over in here. I'm not getting too excited about the fact that this isn't finished. I'm still going to be putting another layer on top of here, but I do want to soften this edge either now or after it's totally dry. This is a little too harsh, so let's just come in with my damp brush, not a wet brush, but a damp brush. The interesting thing about watercolor is that the control between light, how much water to paint ratio is so important. And if we don't have it somewhat right, controlling that and controlling how much you've got it happening is going to be your trick to feeling comfortable about putting paint onto the page. So you can tell sometimes as you start to put paint on how quickly it's spreading. If the page is very wet, the paint will spread quite rapidly. If the page is dry, it will just spread a little bit or not at all. And I'm about to the point here where I need to stop doing anything on this. Let's just put a little bit of orange. I think this is dried enough. Yeah, that edge is still pretty dry. So I can put just a little bit of dark into this hole with that orange. When I go to get that darker, the real dark, and we're going to end up going almost toward brown, orange is going to be the basis in there. And so I can put orange down first, and then I can put other colors in on top of it to make the final colors. Okay, I think we've done all right on this. There's a point when I really shouldn't put anything further down, but I could, I'll show you what happens. It may move it too much. I could bring a little tiny bit of green, and this is not super wet. Maybe dry it on my rag just a little bit to start with. I saw it just pushing it away there where it was a little wetter. I can bring some of these down into this damp area. It's going to push paint away. In this area here, where it's a little drier, it's not going to push paint away as much. We can do the same thing up in these little areas. I'm just making those follow the direction of the apple. And once again, we've got to be careful about making this too even. And if I do too much of this, it's just going to get messy looking. So I think we're at the point when I need to stop, let this dry. I'll lift that little line out of there later. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and turn this off. I'll let you go ahead and play with this one apple at a time. Bring it up to that point. Remember that this needs to stay lighter here than the apple behind. This stays quite light. You can leave it even white to begin with, and we'll work it up more. So you could bring all three of those apples up to that point before we move on to the next step. Or you can end up taking one apple almost complete and then doing the next step. I'm going to bring this second apple up to this midpoint, and I'm just taking this little piece of paint that got on here off by dampening it, rubbing it just a tiny bit with my brush, and then taking my rag and lifting the last of it. But this last, our apple back here, we need to keep it light here, we need to keep it light around those edges, and then it's going to actually get fairly dark in the dark area, but we're not doing that on this layer. So let's just come in. Once again, we started this by putting a little bit of yellow down. just done something that I absolutely do not want, and that is I don't want any of that to get wet. Bad news bears. And now I'm going to start bringing some orange into this. The reality is that in that dark, it's going to actually go almost brown. But we don't want it to be muddy, and so it's a little more complex to get this on here and not get muddiness. I'm going ahead and just letting this be the full darkness of the color. Right on up into there, because that's going to go quite a bit darker. And then we have a touch of green up in this top, and the greens can come down and come into here just a little bit. I'm just going to let that sort of flow into there a little bit. I don't want to mix it around very much, because if I do, it's going to start getting really muddy. But if I have this just what do I want to say, lightly coming in there and just dropping in and letting it bleed on its own, it will not get as muddy as if I work it around. The more I work this in here, the muddier it's going to look. So I just want to sort of gently pass this around. I've got a little orange on my brush now, but that's okay. It's going to come up in there. So this is just sort of this soft, gentle shift, and it's going to go darker when we finish it. Now I need to rinse my brush and dry it a little bit, because over on this side we've got a highlight, so I want to soften those edges. And I'm actually seeing a little feeling of more pink, so let's just bring some red into this. And one reason I wanted to paint this area is that I wanted this highlight to stand out, and I couldn't, it would not stand out unless there's something to contrast it against. Now I just need to softly do this so that that highlight is still there. It's a little darker right on that edge. And then remember, this is not going to be a hard line up here. I need to now come in with my damp brush and just break that edge with the damp brush to soften that. Sometimes you end up having to pull it back into here just a little bit to have that happen properly. Hard edges are fine there. We want hard edges there. And now the other place that didn't get it in the first wash was up in here. There's an oval shape here where that hole is for the heart of the apple, where the stem comes out. And let's just, I want to just, feeling of orange right on that edge. So just come in and just sort of touch the edge with my brush to get a little bit of orange on that edge. And there, I can come back later to do a little more of this. Ooh, but I am seeing something that I have to do. There's a dry spot right here. I need to put in some more dark paint right there on that dry spot, or else I'm going to get a hard line around it. And also not liking, I don't know, I might have to deal with this later. I'm not liking that overlap right there. As you can see, it's pretty easy to pick up paint we're going to be putting another darker layer in on top of here. Now, softening. Now that that's sat for a minute, I'm going to soften these edges just a wee tiny bit. But this edge is going to stay hard. And it's going darker right in here, so I'm going to put just a little orange in there, knowing that I'm going to put more color in on top of that. Just pull that up a little tiny bit into that green. Now I can leave that alone. My next area that I want to bring this middle apple up to pretty close to completion. But the thing that we need to talk about is the fact that this dark, although our mind says, okay, it's an orange, it's red, it's orangey green, the reality is that it's brown. So look at, as I put this brown on here, how close it is to that. It's darker than this brown here, but it's definitely a brownish tone versus over in here is the beautiful orange. See, it matches this orange pretty nicely. And as we get over into here, it's more gray, and there it's quite a few shades darker than the orange that was on that side. So this is 2 or 3 shades darker than the orange that's over here. The only way to get this darker, because this was as dark as our orange could get, we now have to actually add some of the opposite color to it to darken it down. And so if I take a little bit of ultramarine blue and add it into my orange, depending on how much I have in there, remember we made that orange by quinacridone rose. Now we're leaning into a red side brown, and we add a little more New Gamboge to it. We get an orange brown. And let's just try this on my sheet here. That's pretty close to the color we want. Okay. But I feel like it needs to get dulled down just a little tiny bit more, which means I'm going to add a little tiny bit more blue to it. And I want to do just a little tiny bit at a time so I don't get it too dark. So it's actually a brown that we're putting on here. And this was dry. I painted that earlier, just make sure it really is dry. My darkest area is right here. And remember, things are transparent, so some of what's underneath there will show back up. So I'm putting on a dark patch of paint, and then I'm going to grade that. Actually, it's going to come dark all the way down to there. Then I'm going to grade this by rinsing my brush and drying it, and then coming in with this damp and picking up the edge of this and pulling it over, picking up the edge of that. Well, I've got to rinse my brush again. So I rinse my brush as I pull that over a little bit and dried it halfway. Rinse my brush again, pulled it over, and so that's my darkest area. And now I didn't get this quite even in here, so let's just add a little more dark into here to get this darker in that area. It feels like it needs a little more green into it, so I'm going to just add some green into here, and it's got to come right down to this edge. And play that grade a little bit more. I got to be careful not to overwork this, because if I do, it's just going to get muddy. And then we're going to just gently, without getting all the way to that edge, because I'm still damp out in that other area, just grading this a little tiny bit. And if my brush is drier than my paint, it will pick up paint from here. If it's wetter, if it has more paint on it than I have on the page, then the paint will come off the page and onto, off the brush and onto the page. Now this feels like it needs to be a little more green and a little darker green over in here. And then we have this sort of green-brown texture on the top of this page, the apple. And so with a little bit of dry brush work coming down flat onto the page, let me see if I can get this to work, flat on the page, I can bring this little bit more greeny brown down on top of here. This same brown color needs to go into this hole. Get a little more on my brush. Remember, it's straight at the forward edge because you're going over a cliff, and then it's going to grade up the other side. So we drop it in dark to start with, and then pull it up that other side a little bit, rinse my brush, dry it halfway, grab the edge of this and just soften it up. And it feels like it needs to be a little bit darker up there. And now this wonderful little streaks in here of red color. Don't want too much on my brush. I'm going to start here at the bottom and work my way up with just some little brush marks, following the contour, starting right at this edge. And I'm actually going to paint along this edge just to get a nice crisp line. And a few of them come around those edges. Nice. And do we like, I don't like this edge right here. It needs to be firmer, so let's just come in here and straighten that out. So now we get a crisp light line on that forward apple. This is pretty dark. I think it's getting down to close to being, yeah, it's going to dry a little bit lighter than what we have there. Just sort of comparing it here. Yeah, good. It's a little bit lighter than this real dark, which is the darkness of this back apple. This one's a little bit lighter. This will dry a little bit later. And am I willing to fuss with this just a tiny, tiny bit more? I just feel like it needs some of that green in there still. But I've got to be careful about over fussing this because it's going to look muddy if I over fuss it. So I'm just going to bring some little green texture marks down in here, not working it all over, but just throwing some in there. And a few little spots. And then that stem, the stem is a very dark brown. I could actually go into my burnt sienna, add a little bit of ultramarine blue to it, and we'll get a almost black brown, but not quite. And so then this stem, a little bit darker on the one side. Okay, so that apple's pretty much done. This apple has got its undercoat of mid-tone bright colors. This apple has just its undercoat of yellow with the white, and obviously the background has nothing on it yet. So this gives you some idea of the 3 stages that we're going to be doing. When we do this apple, we're going to have to go even a little darker than we did there, but it's still going to be a brown color. Green and orange, brown, those 3 sort of mixed together. And this apple in the front is only going to be lightly brown on that side because it's not as dark. So this is not as dark as that, although they're pretty close. This one doesn't have green in it, or very little, but this one is our darkest. So when we get to that point, we'll be making those darker. Okay, so I think this gets you to the point where you can almost finish this. But I'll do another one sometime and do an actual finish on at least part of this to show people the total finish on it, because it'd be nice to see how the shadows work and how they add to the picture as well, because they'll help tie the whole thing down.